Hey crew, this is your Captain Caliban speaking. Just a quick note before we get started. I hope you're following us on social media like Twitter and Facebook so you can get news from the world of Trek and updates for what's happening around the show here. And I also hope that you are subscribed to us on iTunes or your local broadcasting platform of choice. It's the best way to get the show so it comes to you as soon as it's ready every week. And this will be the last time that I mention this. That's a lie. I'll probably mention it next week as well. But we are wrapping up our promotion for a giveaway for a Star Trek Trivial Pursuit card set, complete with Galileo shuttlecraft card holder. Ooh. And you can be eligible for that if you go to iTunes, or really your broadcasting platform of choice, and leave us a review. Leave us a rating and review, because we would really appreciate it. And when you leave us a rating or a review, it really helps us with those sites and their particular algorithms. I don't know, maybe a computer from Star Trek could figure it out. But when we get good ratings, we move up in the ranks, which means that we get to be exposed to more people, and our reach is greater, so we get more opportunities to bring great stuff to you. So we'd appreciate that. We'll announce the winner soon, like I said in a previous show. If you go to iTunes before the end of the month and leave us a review and a rating, your name will be entered in a drawing to win that Trivial Pursuit set. It's just a chance to win a fun little prize, and for us to thank you guys for your support. Thanks again, and let's get underway.
It's worked so far, but we're not out yet.
I wanna know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I wanna know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
Pure energy.
Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, a Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Caliban, and I'm proud to say that at my last performance review, my commanding officer described me as steady, reliable, punctual, although he did seem like he was reaching a bit on that last one. I'm joined on this episode by Dave Stern. Dave is a former editor of the Pocket Books Star Trek line and has written a number of novels and stories in the Star Trek universe, most notably several Enterprise tie-in novels, the original series novel The Children of Kings, and he wrote the first Star Trek audio adventure, Transformations, featuring Captain Sulu. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Permission to come aboard granted. Today we'll be talking about Tapestry, the 15th episode of the 6th season of Star Trek The Next Generation, an episode that revisits literally a pivotal moment in the life of Captain Jean-Luc Picard. And it's an episode that's it's well regarded in fandom. It often makes lists of the 10 best episodes of Star Trek, but as Q essentially plays God, if you will, in this episode, I myself may end up playing the devil, or at least his advocate, in that I don't think that this is a very good episode of Star Trek.
Interesting.
I know.
So I had mentioned before we started that it's one that I remembered really fondly. Uh-huh. And I remembered, I think the core message of it, which is that the mistakes of our youth help us become the people that, we eventually turn out to be. And sure. Picard realizes that sort of his rashness and his immaturity helped him to become a Starfleet captain. And I had mentioned that I hadn't seen it in so long that I went back and watched it. And there are some things about it that still really, really strike home for me. And I think that the core message of the episode is certainly one. And Patrick Stewart and John Delancey, and probably what is, at least to my recollection, one of the more nuanced portrayals of Q that he does.
Well, that's true, yeah. Well, we'll get into the specifics of that a little later in the show. But first, your backstory. How did you come to be a Star Trek fan?
I am someone who is old enough to have watched the original series when it was first on. And I was just a kid, but I remember having to fight with my parents to stay up late. It must have been when they were on Friday nights. And, this is back in the 60s. And it was so cool. So cool. And then, of course, when it went into syndication is when I became a real fan. Yeah. Of the original series. And then I graduated college, moved to New York, and ended up getting a job at Bantam Books. And they had the old James Blish books. Right. They had the stories. And they were still publishing those. and I was working in the publisher's office, and it ticked me off that they were publishing these books, but they weren't using the real Star Trek logo. So I went to somebody and I said, "Why aren't they using the real Star Trek logo?" And people said, "We don't know. Why aren't we using the real Star Trek logo?" So that's sort of the first step towards becoming I was the editor of Pocketbooks for 4 or 5 years, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s.
Can you talk about writing transformations?
Boy, this is another thing that I had to go back and rewatch Tapestry, or at least some of it, to kind of get my memory fresh for this discussion. And very recently, because Transformations is one of the only Star Trek things I've written that I get royalties on, I went back and listened to that, and I don't think I'd really thought about that story in years since I wrote it, which was right around 92 or 93, I think, maybe 94. I can't remember for sure. And I remember that was it was something that I felt, why not do something like this? This was right around the time of when I was editing the novels. Vonda McIntyre was a writer that I worked with on several occasions to write the novelizations, and she had she was friendly with Gene Roddenberry outside of that context, or she'd met him because she was a big Star Trek fan, and she had suggested some backstory for Sulu that I think there's probably 80 million different versions of this story going around, but as I understand it, Vonda suggested a first name for Sulu and a little bit of a backstory that Gene was okay with, and then Vonda worked with that and worked it into the novels. And I remember that George was really, the fans were really pleased with that. And so I thought, why not take this character who's around that people are really enjoying and try and tell another story of when he actually was a captain. So that's what that audiobook was set out to do.
Yeah, I really like the idea of Captain Sulu. I just think that that's a great sort of development, for that character. Seeing him get off the Enterprise and do something else with his life than just steer the thing.
Vonda did so much with that character. There's an original novel that she wrote called The Entropy Effect, which was one of the first, it might have been the first original Star Trek novel, and boy, that was a good book. And Sulu played a significant role. And then we did, in the novelizations that she did for Pocket, a couple of which I worked on with her, and when I say worked on with her, really it was all Vonda. She just, novelizations are on such a tight schedule that basically as soon as, particularly back then, as soon as they were done, the book was, off to the printers. We had a minimal time to do any sort of editing or suggesting or any of that stuff. And with her, you really didn't need any of that. But we also did a book called Enterprise: The First Adventure, which was kind of our take, and it was really Vonda's take on the J.J. Abrams reboot kind of trod some of the same territory of the characters in their Academy years. But again, Sulu had a pretty prominent role, and that was all fresh in my mind when I was looking at that, because they are, the characters and the actors get minimal screen time, particularly in that original series. It was the big three and then everybody else.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, that's the beauty of the expanded sort of universe as well.
Yeah.
Well, I'm assuming that you're a fan of Tapestry. You selected it to discuss today. Can you tell me, other than the reasons that you already sort of expressed, why you wanted to discuss this one specifically? Why does it stick with you?
Well, it does stick with me because I think it's sort of a universal theme, and one of the strengths of Star Trek, one of the strengths of science fiction is that it kind of lets you take those universal themes and place them in and illustrate them using non-everyday, some unique situations. So like everybody, all of us have that desire, man, if I could just go back and not do that, or do that, if I only had the guts to do this, or if I had just not said that. And Q's essentially saying to Picard, okay, go ahead and and don't do that,
Right.
see what happens. And what happens is that, he ends up being a stick in the mud. So yeah, that's the main reason. And I gotta, this is another brief part. Like TV has, every time I watch an episode of the original series, an episode of Next Generation, TV has made such leaps and bounds in terms of I think the quality of the storytelling and just certainly the special effects and all that stuff. I mean, it looks like, the way that maybe it's not quite like this, but sometimes it looks like the way silent movies look to us growing up. It's like,
sure.
It's from another time period, and storytelling has gotten so much more sophisticated and nuanced. And, but still having said that, I think there were some really cool, clever, production tricks that they pulled in that, like, when Picard first meets Q in the afterlife, if it really is the afterlife. I guess we don't even ever really get to know, but they just set it in this big white space they have. And then they show sort of little vignettes from the past, Picard's father, and then the other, and then this scene in the bar with the young Picard, but they don't show the bar. They just show the young Picard getting stabbed. And so I think that's some clever stuff. And I think, unless I didn't check this, but I think that's a Ron Moore episode.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it was written by Ron Moore, yeah.
And so obviously, I mean, he's an incredible writer. And so I think that ultimately, the thing that I was watching Devil in the Dark a few years ago, the original series episode with my son, and of course, the Horda, the monster that comes out that turns out to be just a mother protecting its children, right. That special effect, it is like a walking carpet, and you have to laugh, but the writing is so good, and the performances are great. And so that stuff, that remains. And,
sure.
And that's one of the things that I think carries Tapestry through. I think, although I didn't, I just glanced through the episode again. I thought the actress who played Picard's young friend, I remember Benavides, something like that. It was a B name. She was really good, and you had that same sort of sense of what might have been, and so that there's some powerful stuff in there.
That was actress J.C. Brandy, I believe, and reportedly she was 17 years old when they shot that.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the specifics of the episode, Tapestry. It is the 15th episode of the 6th season. First aired on February 15th of 1993. As you mentioned, it was written by Ronald D. Moore, and it was directed by Les Landau, who directed portions of 34 episodes of Next Generation and also various episodes of the other modern series. And there is no stardate given for this episode. It's one of only 5 episodes of TNG that has no stardate, the others being Symbiosis, First Contact, Liaisons, and Sub Rosa. Your mission, if you can, is to give me a 25-word synopsis of Tapestry.
Picard, after being apparently killed and sentenced to the afterlife, has a chance to relive the mistakes of his misspent youth.
Ooh, that's good. That's a good elevator pitch. I like that. This episode was written, as we said, by Ronald D. Moore, and I think it was originally planned to have a much broader scope. Supposedly it was inspired by Patrick Stewart's one-man version of A Christmas Carol. Ronald Moore entitled his draft A Q Carol, and it was to involve a scene in France during Picard's childhood, also a scene on the Stargazer that would have potentially depicted Jack Crusher's death. But Michael Piller, the writer and the EP on the show, wasn't really on board, and he thought that would be overkill, so he had Moore refine the idea. It's still somewhat present, however, in what you mentioned, the image of Picard's father, and also seeing those kind of flashes in the afterlife. I think that Ronald Moore was using kind of parallels of his own life. You talked about getting a chance to do things over, or even just to sort of realize where you are at the time. And I think that he based it somewhat on his own experiences of dropping out of college, and he was moved to LA. He was sleeping on his friend's floor and thinking, I'm miserable. What did I do with my life? But if he hadn't done that, he wouldn't have been in the position to start getting his scripts produced and end up working for Star Trek. So he it's like something he wanted to change, and he shouldn't have changed it. Like, he was exactly where he needed to be.
Yeah, I was there when Next Generation was first starting up, and I remember meeting Ron Moore when, one of the first couple times, and I'm not sure when he came on the show and when I left, but I remember meeting it, and I don't remember much about the meeting because it was I was meeting a couple other people as well, including Jerry Taylor, who because I did a pitch. I pitched a couple stories to the show that they didn't end up needing, wanting. But I remember meeting Ryan, and he was, I can't believe that I'm here doing this. This is so cool. He was really, he was really over the moon about that. And he seemed like such a nice. I mean, he was a young guy, really young guy.
Something I don't know if this is the Ron Moore Appreciation Society. It could be. Something I always liked about him is his sort of transparency and his willingness to communicate with fans. Like now you can do podcasts or AMAs or whatever on Reddit, but even way back in the 90s, he was doing like chat rooms on AOL, talking about his process and kind of letting fans in on the business and stuff like that. And I've always liked that about him. Yeah,
I think I remember seeing something like that when Battlestar Galactica first started up. He was really available to the fans. There was something going on, and that was a great show too. Obviously, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. And it surprises and it flabbergasts me just as somebody who is a writer, an executive producer, a showrunner. He has so many things to do. He still has time to do that or to tape a podcast. He did a podcast for every episode of Battlestar Galactica, like a commentary companion podcast.
That's what I was remembering. Yes, I remember. Yeah, that was great. It was great.
It's incredible that he could do that. This episode may have had an additional inspiration. James Mooring was a non-staff writer that pitched a near-death experience episode to the team in season 1. And after the episode aired, he wrote a letter to the production staff kind of protesting them using his idea. And Ron Moore and Jerry Taylor apologized to him for sort of unintentionally using the idea, and he was paid for the contribution.
Nice. I mean, as I just mentioned, I had a chance I talked to Jerry a couple times when I was still the editor, and then after I left when I pitched, and you couldn't find a nicer person, to just really, really good people.
Yeah. Apparently there were a few issues filming the afterlife scenes. You had mentioned the sort of white soundstage before. John Delancey as Q wore a white robe, and the lack of contrast made the crew concerned that it wouldn't read and he'd look like a floating head. The scenes actually come out okay, especially in the remasters that I was watching on Netflix, but Delancey says that he was worried about being too animated in the scene, just being this floating head, so it led to his sort of more reserved performances.
There you go.
Yeah, and I think it really fits the episode and the subject matter, because like when Q is not screwing around, is something is serious.
Yeah, and that character... I never really liked that character, but the character, but except in this episode, because it's not him doing silly things. It's kind of him saying, he is kind of, it's now that you mentioned the Christmas Carol thing, which I hadn't heard before. I mean, it's so apropos. It's so right on. And so it's just much more, it's much easier to watch,
Yeah.
It is funny. Like if you watch, you go back and you watch like old time movies, it's like theater actors trying to figure out how to, or they oversell the performance, and
sure.
that nuance, that close ups and quick cuts and
all
the
whole
things,
vocabulary of cinema.
The whole vocabulary just changed so much, and that's what some of that stuff just doesn't age well,
Right.
And so. All these things, as much as I love, the original Star Trek, and there's portions of them that just seem dated. I'm kind of repeating myself here, but so I'm really looking forward to seeing, how Star Trek handles the new sort of television realities with the new show.
Yeah,
the new sort of the way that you can have these intersecting, overlapping, ever evolving plot lines with multiple characters through multiple episodes,
and I think that's the plan too. I think that this is kind of a tangent, but we're free to do that on this show. I think that kind of one of the problems with the Paramount series is in general, and what may have led to Enterprise kind of being truncated, is that the production wasn't really evolving with the times, and they weren't putting on kind of a modern show, and so hopefully they've learned that lesson,
right?
And we'll deliver that with Star Trek Discovery.
It looks like they have good,
they have good people. Yeah,
they have good people. So we'll see, and what I've seen of the casting looks really interesting too. So
yeah. A couple more fun facts about the episode. We were talking about Q. This is one of 4 Q episodes that don't feature the letter Q in the name. The others are being, of course, Counter at Farpoint, All Good Things, and the Voyager episode Death Wish. The scenery outside of Picard's quarters at Starbase Earhart was a model reused from Logan's Run, and it also had been used in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and the TNG episode Final Mission. And as far as reusing props goes, apparently some of the props, like the mugs and glasses in the recreational facility in the episode, were used in the 10 Commandments. So nice work, Paramount Prop Division. They don't throw anything away.
Right?
And this episode marks the first on-screen appearance of the Nausicaans, who look like a cross between, I don't know, like a Predator and an 80s metal band. I'm going to say Dokken, right. I think, for this one.
There you go. And that's, that is a lesson, man. I hope they learn that prosthetic aliens do not age well.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. They're so close to being able to do almost anything they want with CGI. Like, and I'm just saying that because I only just got a chance to see Rogue One, the Star Wars movie. Maybe it's heresy to mention Star Wars on a Star Trek
We've
podcast.
Done it before.
But they brought back a couple characters using CGI. Yeah, and it almost worked. It was.
I would agree. I would agree that it almost worked. Yes.
So, I don't know. Maybe we'll see Leonard Nimoy yet again. Who knows?
Oh boy! Oh, don't even joke. They have mentioned already that they're going to do. These won't be your daddy's aliens. Like, they're probably going to reinvent some of the looks of aliens. I just want to see, and another guest on the show has mentioned this before. I can't remember who. I'd like to see some of the original races that always get kind of left out, like Talarians and Andorians. Some of those kind of early races.
They did do a good take. It's one of the things I remember from Enterprise. They did a good take on the Andorians.
Yes.
In that. They made them really nasty. There was that one recurring character that they had whose name I can't remember.
Yeah,
but,
I always forget his name too.
But he's in there. So, yeah.
Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty here. The first thing I guess I'm interested in, with your opinion, is what do you think is actually happening in the episode? Like, does Q actually send Picard back in time, like Quantum Leap, or is this a vision, or a pocket universe? Because the encounter plays out a bit differently than Picard describes it in Samaritan Snare. Of course, this event is referenced in Samaritan Snare, and of course we get a bit of added context on Picard's laugh. But like, what do you think's happening in the episode?
That's a good question. I have to think that it's some sort of elaborate. I don't think it's really the afterlife. I don't. I think it's something that Q is doing within Picard's mind. It's some sort of illusion, but then that sort of causes you to think that perhaps this is Q trying to tell Picard, you don't really want to change the way you were, because that's certainly the ending message.
If there was some sort of thing where, like, Picard, because there's no proof. Like, if he was in the past and he went, I know one thing. I don't think I like fish anymore, and so he comes back to the present and he doesn't have a fish. He's got a gerbil instead, or something like that. Right. There's no real evidence that anything has really happened. Yeah,
and so I think there's an ending scene with Riker where I kind of watched it with the idea of, maybe, and here's the proof, because I really didn't remember the episode, but instead instead of offering that, and that, like you said, and I used to have fish, but now I have gerbils kind of thing. He just tells, well, that wasn't the first time that I had an encounter with the Nausicaans. So I think that I think it is just Q messing with Picard.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can accept that. That's not, you mentioned the end of that episode too. That's another thing that I agree that Ron Moore is a great writer, but this is an early script of his, and I'm not sure it's perfect. And I hate that going out to the credits on a story. It's like, and then there was the time that we don't get the story. It's like, it's just a trick that I don't really enjoy.
Yeah. And you got to wonder, I mean, I hadn't heard you were mentioning the early version that Ron wanted to do with the Stargazer and Picard's childhood. Because I think they do revisit Picard's child. They do revisit both those things at some point, don't they?
Yeah, there is the episode, where they do the Jack Crusher's death, essentially, on the Stargazer,
Right.
And then, of course, we look at his family in the episode Family.
I mean, to me, what you're describing sounds like because there really isn't that much to this episode in terms of it is a little, repetitious is the only word I can think of. But, Picard basically, Q says, what would you relive if you could? And Picard says, oh, that thing with the Nausicaans. And then so Picard stops his friend from cheating on the Nausicaans. Except then Q comes and tells him, hey, your friend is cheating on the Nausicaans. So Picard, stops him. And then the Nausicaans come and they try getting, there's a little repetition there to get the same point across. Whereas,
and you just mentioned, I hadn't thought about that before. Like Q really does kind of shepherd him through the entire thing. For all we know, Picard to be like, screw Starfleet, and he just walks out the door and just does something else with his life. But Q is constantly kind of bringing him back to sort of the central conflict there.
Yeah, and so I think that I think that perhaps once the original idea got sidetracked, that you're kind of looking for stuff to. Like, to me, it doesn't necessarily go any deeper with each act. Like, there is something. Yeah, there is that little twist, that and now they're going to get into a fight, and now but it doesn't take it the next step. It's all about the same thing. So I think that is a little bit of a weakness, and I think you could have used another actual setting or another actual decision that had to be made by Picard.
Sure. We referenced Christmas Carol before, and more stating that was his inspiration. I think that it also has shades of It's a Wonderful Life in it as well. Mm-hmm. And in fact, one of Michael Pillar's objections to the episode is that he said that shows do It's a Wonderful Life when they're out of ideas, like when they're tired. And he didn't feel like they were at that point yet in the show. So this also reads to me a lot like Peggy Sue Got Married, the Coppola movie, although I guess it's more Patty Stu Got Maimed, but it's just a similar thing where somebody kind of relives or wishes they could relive something. The part everybody likes the most in this episode, which is when we see that laugh from Picard for the second time, and it's layered with more significance as he realizes that he's reclaiming his life. It's both the high point and the low point in my mind, and you'll have to forgive my little rant here, but I just think the episode itself is just so light. I mean, you mentioned before there's no other complications. There's no real B story. We follow Picard at the starbase. I think his friends are two-dimensional. I think the actors do a okay job with what they're given, but they're just like one friend really wants to cheat at pool, and the other friend he sleeps with, and then she basically just blows him off. So they're kind of crappy friends. And we learned Picard was kind of a hellion when he was young. He has a traumatic experience, and he matures. That's it. I mean, that's what we get for 45 minutes of our time. Yeah. Like, I agree that seeing the laugh and having it be imbued with more meaning is neat, but it seems like the whole show is written backwards from that point.
That very well may be, and I can't really, like I said, on my second viewing, I can't really disagree with you because I thought, oh, man, we are
here to bury this episode and not praise it.
No, I think it's good for that point, but there should have been a little bit more to it, probably. Yeah. And to repeat myself, just what you were talking about, there could be nuance, and of course there could be the dilemma of two goods, as in City on the Edge of Forever, where you go back in time and here's your choice, end of the world or the woman you love. Picard's choice was get stabbed or go back to the way things were. So yeah, the best ones of those episodes, and City being the best one that I can think of off the top of my head, do present that choice of two, irreconcilable goods. Yeah, is the phrase that.
Sometimes there's unintended consequences. Let's talk about the...
It could have been, though. It could have been like, he discovers that this friend, that was just a friend, could have been the love of his life, something like that. They could have done... True. They could have gone there, or they could have done, this guy died, maybe the friend gets killed when Picard gets stabbed. And so that's Picard's choice. If he starts the fight, his friend gets killed, and he becomes captain. Yeah. But... if he doesn't start the fight, then his friend lives and he becomes who knows where you go from there. But.
Well, that's true. And I'm sure that other extended universe novels have explored that. Let's talk about the character of Picard, something that unbelievably I don't think has really come up on the show yet. So you get to blaze that particular trail. This episode is interesting when considered through the lens of A Christmas Carol. But unlike Carol, they basically kind of Scrooge Picard in the episode, so he has to kind of unscrooge himself. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Like when he goes and he suddenly he becomes Lieutenant Junior Grade Picard, like that's not the life he wants. So instead of changing, his life after this night being visited by the ghosts, like he becomes something bad, realizes, oh no, I liked what I was in the first place. What do you think about young Picard being kind of a troublemaker?
Well, I think that makes sense, particularly when he's asking Riker and Troy to evaluate him. You don't stand out, you don't take any chances. And I think part of that is the squeaky wheel getting the grease. You have to do something out of the ordinary if you want to stand out, and also if you want to make change.
Yeah.
Boy, I almost brought politics into it, but I decided not to.
Uh-oh, that's not what this show's about. Yeah, right? I think it's supposed to kind of stand in contrast as well to a character like Kirk, who's apparently kind of a bookworm and a Boy Scout when he was younger, and he developed into a swashbuckler once he hit space. Is that
true?
I think so, yeah, because we all have this picture of Kirk as this two-fisted, sort of red-blooded American spaceman. Right. But whenever he talks about his life, his earlier life, his father was important to him, and he was always getting good grades, and he was kind of by the book at the academy. Of course, they layer in things like he cheated on the Kobayashi Maru test, and then of course the new J.J. Abrams movies go way out there, and he's taking alien chicks two at a time and whatever it is. But,
riding the motorcycle.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's what came to mind. Yeah, to be honest, I don't really remember much about the Kirk backstory, but interesting that they did flip it, if what you're saying is the way it was. Yeah.
And of course we have to talk about Lieutenant Junior Grade Picard, the guy in the blue shirt. There's a cut scene in the shooting script where he interacts with Geordi, who's his boss, and Geordi treats him fairly similar to how he treats Lieutenant Barclay when you see him on the show.
Interesting.
Which is kind of, that's kind of a stark sort of dichotomy there. I know that this is a construct of the show. It may even be a literal construct by Q, as you mentioned, but I kind of reject the dichotomy that arises based on this decision to fight the Nausicaans, because it kind of says, like, you do something brash and you can be captain of the flagship, or if you do something sensible, you end up as Barclay. And I'm not sure that I really buy that sort of thing. People are doing sensible things on Star Trek all the time.
Right. And, this is I don't know if it would be one gripe, but I think that, Starfleet as an organization with ranks and officers of different abilities and it always seems to me, maybe it's just that I'm getting older, that it's a bunch of kids in charge of stuff,
Okay, sure.
and so I think that, the exception being, in Next Generation, for sure, Picard is the older, seasoned guy who's seen it all. And so, and I guess it's not just Star Trek that I would say that, but maybe in some other shows. But I think you raise a valid point, because certainly in the context of somebody's life, the rashness, if you will, to fight another race is not really indicative of that same sort of, hey, let's take a chance and do this. It's a different. You're talking about recklessness, and then maybe you're talking about daring, as opposed to, why don't we, it took Nixon to talk to the Chinese. I'm sorry.
Right, yeah, sure.
So as opposed to, it took Nixon to beat up a Chinese delivery guy. I don't know. It's a different thing. Sure. It's a different thing. So I think it's a valid point you're making, and I think in the context of the episode, you could maybe have chosen a more meaningful moment in Picard's past. And now, I'm remembering, I was talking earlier about Vonda McIntyre's novelizations and the original stories she did. And I remember when she did that story of the first, her version of the original meeting of the crew of Kirk and Spock and McCoy. She had Kirk recovering from this disaster that went wrong, where he was trying to relive it. He was reliving it in his mind and wishing that he had done something different, and that sort of brought him a level of maturity later on in the story that enabled him to successfully complete that mission. So
Okay.
It's just, it is exactly what you're saying. The difference between like a reckless or just an act of immaturity, maybe, and what they could have maybe played up a little bit more that I'm just thinking of now is the sort of sticking by your friends aspect of it.
Yeah, I can see that too. Yeah. I guess I just get frustrated at, and again, like we said before, like none of this this is a story that Q is basically telling him. He's putting him through a scenario. Like we don't know if any of this would have actually played out this way if he had made a different choice. But I just don't like that. It's possible that like Kirk, Picard's commanding a starship is like his first best destiny. But I don't like the fact that just because he backs down from a fight that he has to be some kind of menial.
Yeah.
And because he could have left Starfleet, he could have gone back into archaeology, he could have been a diplomat, which he's clearly skilled at. He could have done a lot of things.
Right, and they could have followed that career path and sort of outlined why that choice changed everything. But
yeah, that leads me to my sort of crackpot theory for this episode, or my headcanon, which is that it seems like Q is grooming Picard for something, because he's created this little passion play. As we've said, Picard, whether or not he gets into a fight with a guy, is going to make something out of his life, but he shows him that unless he has resolve and he's brash or he's resolute, then there's going to be trouble. And I think maybe he's kind of prepping him for the big test, like we get in All Good Things, or at least the test that they're sort of under for the entire length of the series, which is the Q continuum is kind of looking at humanity, kind of judging them. That's a very original series kind of thing too, having godlike aliens judge us. But
right.
Maybe even though he seems antagonistic, maybe he's kind of giving him the crib notes or something like that a little bit. Like, if you make these big choices, things will turn out better for you. And then, of course, the last episode of the show has him working in 3 different timelines, and everybody's like, what the hell are you talking about? And he's like, no, you got to do this, and you got to do this. And that's the kind of Picard that we need for them to pass the big test that the Qs are going to give him. That's kind of my just crazy theory.
It makes sense. I don't know that it's that crazy, but
well, good. I'll stop taking these pills.
It's been so long since I've seen All Good Things, which I remember like just being blown away by when it.
Well, it's ambitious for sure. I heard once that Renee Echeverria, the series writer on the TNG, was quoted as saying that he's not too fond of the episode because he feels like it promotes violence as a solution. And I guess the production did get a few angry letters from fans kind of saying the same thing that we were talking about how, well, that's not how Starfleet would solve their problems. Do you ever worry about fan mail or fan feedback?
I mean, worry, no. I mean, I think you always listen to, but ultimately you do what feels right. True to the story, what can get accomplished within the deadline as well.
Yes, of course, of course.
Because it is, I mean, I can only imagine, like, you read the stories of how things get done and why choices get made, and,
right.
Practicality looms its ugly head.
Oh, definitely.
Many, many times.
Yeah. I really like how Picard, even when he becomes Lieutenant Picard, like he's still Picard. Like he's respectful. He understands almost immediately that, okay, I'm in a different timeline. I see what's going on here. It's not like he starts shouting at people and punching data.
I had that exact same reaction when I watched it. It was like, they could have gone wait, but I'm supposed to be the captain.
Right. Route, But they didn't have time. It's that practicality.
Right. But you saw the wheels spinning in his head. He's like, okay, I'm not going to make a big deal of this.
Yeah. And the first thing he does is he goes and gets a performance review from his boss, which I thought was interesting. That's so Picard.
Right?
He's like, can I get an application for a red shirt?
Exactly.
I would like to see this story with another character, perhaps. I think something maybe like Riker is tempted to change something in his past, and he doesn't like what he becomes after it's changed, so he learns to accept himself, warts and all. Right. Of course, I guess Peter David kind of already did that story in the novel Imzadi, but like I think that especially when you're teaching a lesson about no, love yourself, love the kind of strong, strident choices you make, that just seems more kind of Riker-y to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, anytime we go back in Riker's past, we get a little too near to Shades of Grey, so we don't want that. No clip shows.
Which one was Shades of Grey? Remind me.
Shades of Grey is the one where he gets stung by a plant or something like that, and so they have to they have to make him remember like his negative memories in order to kill the toxin of the plant. And so it was their clip show because there was a writer strike or the budget was run out or something like that at the end of season 2. So it's that one that everybody hates because half the episode is just Tasha Yar getting thrown across the room by an oil slick and all these other clips from other episodes.
I remember it now.
Yeah.
I remember it now. I think that is like, that is about right when I was leaving, I believe, was when that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sure.
So I was cold turkey. Star Trek.
I know. I can see that. A fun fact, Edward Jellicoe was originally in the script as the captain of the Enterprise. He was, of course, the captain in Chain of Command. But they changed that name to Thomas Halloway because Q has a statement about how you're not that important, Jean-Luc. It's not going to change that much. And when Jellicoe was on the Enterprise, he changed quite a bit. Like he got Troy out of the cheerleader uniform and all that. And so they wanted to make sure that it did seem like the world had just completely gone on without Picard.
That makes sense.
Any episode with Q tends to have some pretty good comedy bits. Did you have a favorite joke or comedy bit from the episode?
No, because to be...
You don't like Q.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. This is the one episode where I kind of, I kind of liked him. And I think, it's hilarious that there was a practical reason why he might have been underplaying parts of it. Because usually I just I said that over the top stuff just kind of puts me in the wrong place.
It kind of does. It does for me as well. But I think in this little fantasy that he's created, he does kind of actually fit a little bit. It's one thing when they're trying to keep a moon from crashing into a planet and he's in a sombrero. It's like, what? But when Picard is seriously looking for guidance or he is worried about his unraveling his entire life, and then he turns around and he's like the German doctor. He's like, Lieutenant Picard.
Right. That was funny.
Those work, yeah.
And he shows up with the flowers when Picard, right. So those are like neat touches.
I like that they call him Johnny Picard. I think that's funny too.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. What are your thoughts on time travel in Trek? I like to ask contributors this when we have time travel on the show. Do you like the sort of Back to the Future thing where you change something and then you disappear from the photograph and maybe there's alternate universes? Or do you like the type of thing where any changes that you can make have already kind of been made, the sort of causality loop type of time travel?
Well, I think they're both fun to play with.
Sure.
But of course, it's so difficult to find something original to do with that. Yeah. With that mechanism, and I mean, it can be it can be really cathartic. You can create some really powerful stuff that lets your characters see things in different ways. Funny, or I'm thinking of, I did a novelization for one of the Tomb Raider movies, which actually I never even saw the movies. I mean, that's how fast you have to. It's like, but.
Was this the one with John Voight?
The one with John Voight.
Okay, sure.
So I had to play around with that a little bit. And that was fun because you could kind of jump from a character's past and have different things appear in ways that would come to mean stuff later.
Yeah.
But it's hard to come up with something that's new.
Yeah, that's true. I think something that I've seen a lot of shows using now is alternate universes.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we've talked about Mirror Mirror on the show previously, but just beyond the idea of, it's the evil universe. But like you said, characters sort of getting information or being informed by past or future events. I'm not sure it's replacing time travel, but I think writers are definitely looking, as you said, for like these kind of new things that are not just the same old Marty McFly type thing over and over again.
Right. Yeah, I think that is pretty cool. The whole alternate universe thing. I definitely use that in an Enterprise novel that I had done, which is actually a 2-part, 2 books, and that notion of traveling to a familiar place that isn't quite as you remember it, and trying to make things right or trying to get back to where you were. I mean, and then you end up with the whole question of, well, where exactly, did I really change things, or did I just end up in a whole new place?
Right.
Which is another.
And it rains donuts or whatever.
Exactly. That'd be good.
Well, as we wrap up here, do you have any final thoughts or kind of parting shots about the episode?
Not really. I think I do still do still have fond memories of it, precisely because I think that it does have the that sort of message of take chances with your life. You know? And that's really, I think that's a powerful message that is universal. But yeah, again, when you reliving or rethinking our conversation of the last little bit, I definitely see weaknesses within it that I hadn't seen.
Yeah, well, I didn't mean to ambush you. I like old Johnny Picard as much as the next guy.
No, I like that stuff too. But I do think, you know, and as I said when I reviewed it, it feels a little thin in spots, and I can't help but wonder, you know, what it might have looked like if
they'd got to blow out the whole Christmas Carol thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a key Picard episode, but I think Picard's defined by how he interacts with others and not by who he does or doesn't punch.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of my main thing. Well, let's talk. My space dad can beat up your space dad. Who's your favorite captain and why?
Well, it's always William Shatner's Kirk, and that's just because he's the one that I grew up, you know, and for what was it, 20 years, he was the only one. So that's certainly, but I think also I like Picard. I put Picard a close second because I think that he is more of a problem solver without resorting to violence. But I think that's also sort of indicative of the sort of the evolution of, you know, the understanding of power and the limits of power that kind of I think everybody has come to understand. But, you know, plus part of the thrill of space travel is to imagine yourself as the dashing captain heading off to, you know, romance and, you know, all these cool things happening to you. And so I think Kirk kind of embodies that excitement. You know, there's a sense of excitement in that series that I think that I don't necessarily think the Next Generation has. Everything is, you know, I think actually probably Next Generation has probably more intelligent adventures, more realistic adventures, you know, at least as far as any of this could be, you know, really realistic. But there's something more boldly going about the original series than there is about, you know, I'm going to put that Star Wars thing in there too, because like you go back, and this is, I do not mean to compare Next Generation to the prequels, the Star Wars prequels, except to say that they are like, they're focused on details sometimes that nobody really cares about.
I think I see your point. Yes.
So, but it's probably a bad comparison, but I sometimes feel that way. And really what they need, like, what's the best science fiction show happening right now? I don't really know.
That's a good question.
Is it Westworld? I have seen some good episodes of that, but
could be. I feel like Westworld is a drama that just kind of happens to be about robots, though.
Yeah, maybe so. You know, Stranger Things had some really cool stuff happening. You know, that had that sense of adventure, like kids going off and exploring.
Yeah, right.
And you're like, and so I guess that sense of wonder, you know, even though it really was only wonder if you were a kid in the 60s and 70s, because by the time you got to the 80s and 90s, the special effects just didn't really cut it, and certainly they don't cut it now. But
yeah, well, hopefully Discovery will capture that sense of wonder.
Exactly, as well. That's the point I was going to make. That they really can get across that. You know, there's sort of the dystopian version of the future that was all the rage for a while, and may still be all the rage, you know, and
yeah, and I think it's significant that, and this happens in the original series films too, but also definitely in the new ones, all the bad guys are admirals, all the bad guys are the authority figures, and that dystopia, I think, kind of creeps in where there's some plot to do this, or the enemy is a former, you know, agent of the Federation or something like that,
right?
And we're not just fighting like outside forces,
right? Or encountering. Yeah, so that sense of, you know, amazing things being out there. I do hope that the new series picks up on that. So.
Yeah, me too. At the end of the show here, you'll receive a commission at the rank of ensign. What department on the ship do you work in?
I definitely work in the library.
So is the library then like an antique store? Because the computer can hold 1 billion books. So if you have actual physical books, is that still a job?
I think it is. It has to be an antique store, right? I mean,
we always see Picard flipping through a book at times. Only
in Star Wars would they, store plans for something on a futuristic floppy disk in a tower.
You've hit the hat trick of mentioning Star Wars, I think.
Oh my God! Well, it's probably because I just watched that this weekend, and I was shaking my head about you've got to be kidding me. They keep it on a floppy disk.
Yeah, apparently, yeah. Ensign Stern, thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can at EISTpod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
They can find me on Facebook. Is probably the best place at Facebook/DA Stern, Facebook.com. I have an author page, and very easy to communicate with me there.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you, Aaron. My pleasure.
We're signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.